The wind howled through the canyon pass with a fury that seemed intent on tearing the world apart. And Josephine Curtis knew in that moment her uncle had just condemned her to death. She watched the wagon wheels kick up snow as Uncle Morris drove away into the white storm, his hunched figure growing smaller until the curtain of falling ice swallowed him completely. The cold bit through her thin cotton dress immediately, needles of frost finding every inch of exposed skin, and she wrapped her arms around herself knowing it would do nothing against the bitter February wind that swept down from the San Francisco peaks. It was 1878, and Williams, Arizona was supposed to be her fresh start after her parents died of fever back in Missouri. Uncle Morris had written letters promising family, warmth, and a place to belong. Instead, she had discovered a bitter drunk who resented every mouth he had to feed and saw her as nothing more than an unwanted burden. The argument had started when she refused his business partner's inappropriate advances at the trading post. Morris had backhanded her right there in front of everyone, then dragged her to the wagon and driven out of town. 5 miles into the mountain pass, he had stopped the horses, told her to get out, and when she hesitated, he had shoved her into the snow. "You think you are too good for honest work," he had snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You can find your own way back or freeze. I do not care which." She had tried to reason with him, tried to apologize for something that was not her fault, but he cracked the reins and left her standing in the middle of the road as the storm intensified. That had been perhaps 10 minutes ago, though time seemed to stretch differently when death was measuring out your remaining heartbeats. Josephine started walking back toward Williams, but the wind pushed against her like a physical force, and the snow was already ankle-deep and rising. Her feet, clad only in worn leather boots with holes in the soles, were going numb. She stumbled forward, keeping her head down against the driving snow, trying to follow where she thought the road might be. Everything looked white and formless. The temperature was dropping fast as afternoon gave way to evening, and she knew she would not survive the night out here. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, tasting copper. The dress she wore, a faded blue cotton thing that had belonged to her mother, offered no protection. She had a shawl, but it was thin and already soaked through. Josephine thought of her parents, buried side by side in the little cemetery outside St. Louis, and wondered if she would join them soon in whatever came after this life. She was only 20 years old. She had imagined growing old, having children, finding love. Instead, she was going to become another unmarked grave in the wilderness, if anyone even found her body. The unfairness of it burned in her chest almost as much as the cold. Her foot caught on something buried under the snow and she fell hard, her hands plunging into the icy powder. The shock of it drove the air from her lungs. For a moment she just knelt there, wanting to give up, to let the snow cover her and make it all stop. But something stubborn in her refused. She pushed herself back to her feet, swaying, and forced herself to take another step. Then another. Her progress was painfully slow. The world had become a white blur. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her face. The wind screamed in her ears, drowning out thought. She tried to pray but could not remember the words. Everything was cold, so cold that it had stopped hurting and just felt distant, like her body belonged to someone else. That terrified her more than the pain had. She knew what it meant when you stopped feeling cold. She did not hear the horse until it was nearly on top of her. The animal loomed out of the storm like something from a dream, a big bay gelding with a rider hunched against the wind. Josephine tried to call out, but her voice was a weak croak that the storm swallowed instantly. Her legs gave out and she collapsed into the snow again, this time lacking the strength to rise. The rider dismounted in one smooth motion and was at her side in seconds. Through her blurred vision, she saw a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face mostly hidden by a bandana pulled up against the cold. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat tied down with a scarf, dressed for the storm in a way that spoke of someone who knew this country. "Jesus Christ, what are you doing out here?" His voice was rough but urgent. He did not wait for an answer. Instead, he shrugged out of his coat with quick efficiency and wrapped it around her shaking shoulders. The residual warmth from his body heat hit her like a physical shock, and she gasped. "Can you stand? We need to get you out of this storm." My uncle." Her words came out slurred, her lips too numb to form them properly. "We can talk later. Right now we move or you die." He pulled her to her feet, keeping one arm locked around her waist when she swayed. He was strong, she realized distantly, holding her weight like it was nothing as he half carried her to his horse. The bay stamped nervously, eyes rolling at the storm. "I am going to put you on my horse. Hold on to the saddle horn." He lifted her easily and set her in the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, effectively caging her against his chest. Even through her dazed state, she could feel the solid warmth of him at her back, smell horse and leather and something like pine. He kicked the bay into motion and the horse moved forward, the rider guiding it with sure hands. "Where?" She tried to ask. "There is a line shack about a mile east of here. We are going to wait out the storm there." His voice was close to her ear, pitched to carry over the wind. "Stay awake." "Talk to me. What is your name?" "Josephine. Josephine Curtis." Each word was an effort. "I am Robert Yates. People call me Rob." He kept the horse moving at a steady walk, trusting the animal's instincts as much as his own knowledge of the terrain. "What happened, Josephine?" "Why are you out here without a coat?" "My uncle left me." The words came out flat, emotionless. She was too cold and tired to explain further. She felt him tense behind her. "He what?" He was angry. "He drove me out here and made me get out of the wagon, then he left." She was shaking so hard now that her teeth rattled. The coat he had given her helped, but she had been too far gone before he found her. "I tried to walk back to town." Rob cursed, a long string of words that would have made her mother blush. "What is your uncle's name?" "Morris Curtis." Another curse, shorter but more vehement. "I know him. He drinks at the Silver Star." A pause. "You are going to be all right, Josephine. I promise you that. Just stay with me a little longer." She wanted to believe him, but everything felt so distant. The rhythmic movement of the horse was hypnotic, and the warmth of his body at her back made her want to sleep. Her eyes drifted closed. "Hey!" Rob's voice was sharp, cutting through her fog. "Eyes open. Look at me." He turned her face toward him with one gloved hand, his fingers gentle despite the command in his tone. She forced her eyes to open and met his gaze. Even in the storm's gloom, she could see they were a striking gray-green, intense and focused entirely on her. "That is better. Tell me about Missouri." "You have that accent. St. Louis," she mumbled. "I came here after my parents died. Uncle Morris was supposed to." She trailed off. "Keep talking. Tell me about your parents." She did, or tried to, the words coming in disjointed fragments. Her father had been a clerk, her mother a seamstress. They had died within days of each other when fever swept through their neighborhood. She had been alone with no money and no prospects when Uncle Morris's letter arrived. It had seemed like providence. Now she knew better. The shack materialized out of the storm like a miracle, a small structure made of rough-hewn logs with a slanted roof. Rob guided the horse right up to it, then dismounted and pulled her down after him. Her legs would not hold her, and he caught her before she hit the ground. Without a word, he picked her up and carried her to the door, kicking it open with his boot. Inside was dark and cold, but at least the wind was not trying to flay the skin from her bones. He set her down carefully on a wooden bunk against one wall, then moved with purpose around the small space. She heard the strike of a match, and a moment later warm light bloomed as he lit a lantern hanging from a beam. Another match, and he was kneeling by a small iron stove, coaxing kindling to life. Within minutes, flames were crackling, and he fed in larger pieces of wood from a box beside the stove. "This is a line shack," he explained as he worked, his voice calmer now that they were out of immediate danger. "Ranch hands use it during cattle drives and hard weather. There should be supplies." He opened a cabinet and pulled out blankets, a tin of coffee, some dried meat and beans. Not much, but enough. Josephine was still shaking, her whole body convulsing with shivers. Rob brought the blankets over and wrapped them around her, layering them on top of his coat, which she still wore. Then he knelt in front of her and started unlacing her boots. "I need to check your feet for frostbite," he said when she made a weak noise of protest. "That is all. I am not going to hurt you." Her boots came off and he carefully peeled away her wet stockings. She looked down at her feet and saw they were white and waxy looking, frighteningly pale. Rob's jaw tightened, but his hand stayed gentle as he examined them, pressing carefully on her toes. "Can you feel this?" he asked. "Barely." "That is actually good. Means they are not too far gone." He stood and went to the stove, pouring water from a canteen into a battered pot and setting it to heat. "I need to warm them slowly. Too fast and it will damage the tissue." While the water heated, he tended to the horse, bringing the animal into a small lean-to attached to the side of the shack and rubbing it down. When he came back inside, his hat and bandana were white with snow, but his movements were unhurried and methodical. He tested the water, deemed it ready, and brought the pot over. Very carefully, he lowered her feet into the warm water. The sensation was excruciating. Josephine gasped and tried to jerk away, but Rob held her ankles gently but firmly. "I know it hurts. That means the blood is flowing again, which is what we want. Just breathe through it." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded, biting her lip. He stayed kneeling there, holding the pot steady, his face serious. After a few minutes, the worst of the pain subsided to a deep ache. He changed the water twice, gradually increasing the temperature, never taking his eyes from her feet. His focus and care touched something in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." Rob looked up at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment. She saw him take in her dark hair plastered to her head with melted snow, her pale face, her blue eyes that were probably red-rimmed from cold and tears. Whatever he saw made his expression soften. "Any decent person would have done the same," he said. "But you are the one who did." She paused. "Your coat, you must be freezing." "I have been colder." But she noticed he moved closer to the stove after he finished with her feet, pulling another blanket around his own shoulders. He hung their wet things on pegs near the stove to dry, then set about making coffee. The smell of it filled the small shack, rich and comforting. He handed her a tin cup, and she wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. He settled on the floor near the stove with his own cup, long legs stretched out in front of him. Now that they were inside and the immediate crisis had passed, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was all strong lines and angles, with a straight nose and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though he was not smiling now. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough, weathered way. "What were you doing out there?" she asked. "In the storm, I mean. Coming back from the Perkins Ranch. I work for the Double R about 10 miles south of Williams. Was checking on a horse they wanted to sell. He sipped his coffee. Storm came up faster than I expected. I was trying to make it back to town when I saw you. Lucky for me. Lucky for both of us that I know this country. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Tell me what happened, everything this time. So she did. She told him about arriving in Williams 3 weeks ago, about discovering that Uncle Morris was nothing like his letters suggested, about the incident at the trading post with his business partner, a greasy man named Silas Holt, who had cornered her by the feed sacks and put his hands on her. How she had slapped him and Morris had been furious, not at Holt but at her for causing trouble. How the argument had escalated until he dragged her out of town. Rob's face grew darker as she spoke, his jaw working. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. A man who would leave a woman to freeze to death is not worth the air he breathes, he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. And Holt is known for bothering women. You were right to slap him. Uncle Morris said I was being difficult, that I should be grateful for the attention. She stared into her coffee. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should have just no. Rob's voice cut through her words, sharp and certain. Do not think that way, not even for a second. What they did was wrong. What your uncle did was worse than wrong. It was attempted murder. The bluntness of it made her flinch, but he was right. Morris had tried to kill her, whether through direct action or neglect hardly mattered. The realization settled over her like another weight. I have nowhere to go, she said quietly. No family except Morris, no money. I used everything I had to get here. Rob was quiet for a moment, thinking. We will figure something out, he said finally. But not tonight. Tonight we wait for the storm to pass and get you warm. Tomorrow we deal with the rest. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the shack's walls, but inside it was growing almost cozy. The stove radiated heat, pushing back the cold. Josephine felt exhaustion creeping over her now that she was safe and warm. Her eyes kept drifting closed. You should sleep, Rob said, noticing. Take the bunk, I will keep the fire going. What about you? I have slept in worse places. He pulled another blanket from the cabinet and made himself a nest on the floor near the stove. Go on. Rest. She wanted to argue, to insist he take the bunk since he had given up his coat and his warmth for her, but she was too tired. She lay down on the hard bunk, wrapped in layers of blankets, and was asleep within moments. She woke once in the night, disoriented and cold despite the blankets. The fire had burned low and the temperature in the shack had dropped. She was shivering again, her teeth chattering. Before she could even think about getting up to add wood to the stove, Rob was there, as if he had been watching over her. He fed more logs into the stove, coaxing the flames higher, then looked at her huddled form. You are still too cold, he said. The blankets are not enough after what you went through. You need more warmth. She nodded, too miserable to be bashful. He hesitated only a moment before climbing onto the bunk beside her, staying on top of the blankets. He pulled her against him carefully, lending her his body heat. She should have been scandalized, should have protested, but all she felt was grateful. The warmth of him seeped through the blankets, chasing away the chill that had settled into her bones. She tucked her face against his chest and let herself relax into his solid presence. Better. His voice rumbled in his chest, low and soothing. Yes, thank you. His arm tightened around her slightly. Sleep. I have got you. And she did, feeling safer than she had in months when she woke again. Pale morning light was filtering through gaps in the shutters. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie quiet. Rob was already up, stoking the fire and heating water for coffee. He glanced over when he heard her stir and gave her a small smile. How are you feeling? She took inventory. Sore everywhere, her feet tender and achy but alive. Better than I have any right to feel. Good. He brought her coffee and some of the dried meat, which she ate gratefully. Her dress had dried overnight, though it was wrinkled and stained. His coat had dried too, and he shrugged back into it. Outside, the world was white and pristine, the sun glinting off fresh snow. It was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "We should be able to make it back to Williams now," Rob said. "Storm has passed, and the main road will be buried but passable if we are careful." Josephine's stomach knotted with anxiety. "I cannot go back there. Morris will." "Morris is not going to touch you." Rob's voice was flat with certainty. "I promise you that. But we need to get you somewhere warm and safe, and Williams is the closest town. I know people there who can help." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. There was nowhere else to go out here. She nodded reluctantly and pulled on her boots, which were stiff from drying but at least no longer soaked. Rob bundled her back into blankets, apologizing that he only had the one coat, but she was in better shape now than she had been yesterday. They left the shack tidy, Rob's range training evident in how he made sure everything was squared away for the next person who might need shelter. The ride back to Williams took over 2 hours. The bay gelding struggled through deep snow in places, but Rob guided the animal with patience and skill. Josephine rode in front of him again, his arms around her as he handled the reins. In the daylight, without the terror of the storm, she was more aware of him. Of the steady beat of his heart against her back, the competent way he managed the horse, the fact that he had risked his own life to save hers. "Why did you give me your coat?" she asked at one point. "You could have died too." "Could not leave you to freeze," he said simply. "Would not." "But you did not know me. Did not need to." He paused. "My sister died when I was 17. She got caught in a flash flood and I could not reach her in time. Ever since then, if I see someone in trouble, I do not hesitate, cannot hesitate. Maybe that is selfish, trying to make up for not saving her, but that is the truth of it." Josephine twisted to look back at him, seeing the old pain in his eyes. "I am sorry about your sister, me too." He refocused on the path ahead. "But I am glad I found you in time. So am I." They rode in companionable silence for a while. Williams gradually came into view, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the railroad tracks. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from a distance, she could hear the sounds of people going about their business. Anxiety spiked in her chest again. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The boarding house run by Mrs. Alina Grant. She is a good woman, tough as nails. She will give you a room and probably a job if you want it. I will pay for the first week until you can get on your feet." He felt her tense. "Before you argue, you can pay me back when you are able. Consider it a loan, not charity." "I do not know when I could pay you back." "Then you owe me. I can live with that." Something about the way he said it made warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with temperature. She settled back against him and let herself enjoy these last few minutes of closeness before they reached town and reality intruded. Rob guided the horse directly to a 2-story building with a painted sign reading Grant's Boarding House. He dismounted and helped Josephine down, steadying her when her sore legs nearly buckled. Together they climbed the steps, and Rob knocked firmly on the door. It opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She looked from Rob to Josephine, taking in their disheveled appearance and the blankets wrapped around Josephine, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Robert Yates, what have you gotten yourself into?" she asked. "Morning, Mrs. Grant. This is Miss Josephine Curtis. She needs a room and your protection." Rob's voice was respectful but firm. "It is a complicated story, but the short version is her uncle tried to kill her by leaving her in yesterday's storm. I found her and we sheltered at the Miller Line shack. She needs a place to stay where she will be safe." Alina Grant's eyes narrowed dangerously. Which uncle would that be, Morris Curtis? That waste of skin. Alina stepped back, opening the door wider. Get in here, both of you. You look half frozen. I will get some breakfast in you and we will figure this out properly. The boarding house interior was warm and smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Alina led them to the kitchen and immediately set about dishing up food. A younger woman was there, perhaps 30, with red hair and freckles. Alina introduced her as her daughter, Margaret. Meg, this is Miss Curtis. She will be staying with us. Get the blue room ready, the one with the good stove. Meg took one look at Josephine and nodded, disappearing upstairs without question. Alina pushed plates of eggs and bacon in front of them, along with fresh coffee, and stood with her arms crossed while they ate. Now tell me everything, she commanded. Rob and Josephine took turns explaining, Rob handling most of it while Josephine focused on eating. She had not realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. Alina's face grew progressively darker as the story unfolded. That man should hang, she said flatly when they finished. What he did is criminal. Yes, madam, Rob agreed. But we need to keep Miss Curtis safe first. Can she stay here? Of course she can, as long as she needs. Alina looked at Josephine. Can you work? I could use help with cooking and cleaning. It would not pay much, but you would have room and board and safety. I can work, Josephine said quickly. I am a hard worker, I promise, and I can sew. My mother was a seamstress and she taught me. Good. We will work out the details after you have rested. Alina turned to Rob. What about Morris? He will come looking for her. Let him try. Rob's voice was cold. I will be making sure he understands that would be a mistake. Robert, do not do anything that will get you thrown in jail. I will not. He finished his coffee and stood. But Morris Curtis and I are going to have a conversation. Josephine grabbed his wrist before he could leave. Please do not. He is not worth you getting hurt over. Rob looked down at her, his expression softening. I will be fine. But he needs to know you are under protection now, that if he even looks at you wrong, there will be consequences. She wanted to argue more, but Alina shook her head slightly. Josephine released his wrist reluctantly. Rob gave her one last look, something unreadable in his eyes, and then he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Alina guided Josephine upstairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. A small iron stove in the corner was already radiating heat, courtesy of Meg. It was more than Josephine had dared hope for. You rest now, Alina said. We will talk more later. You are safe here. I give you my word on that. Thank you, Mrs. Grant. I do not know how to repay. Hush. Women help women in this world because Lord knows the men will not always do it. Alina's stern face softened slightly. Though that Robert Yates is one of the good ones, you were lucky he found you. I know. Josephine's voice was barely a whisper. Alina left her alone, and Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She had nearly died. Rob had saved her, giving her his coat and his warmth and his protection without asking for anything in return. Now she had a room and the promise of work. It felt surreal. She thought about Rob, about the way he had held her through the night to keep her warm, about the determination in his voice when he promised Morris would not touch her. Something had sparked between them in that shack, something neither of them had put into words but both had felt. She barely knew him, but she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone in a long time. Downstairs, she could hear the sounds of the boarding house going about its day. Footsteps, voices, the clatter of dishes. Normal life continuing around her while hers had been turned completely upside down. She lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached and her heart felt bruised, but under all of that was a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. Meanwhile, Rob was walking through the muddy streets of Williams with purpose in every stride. He knew where to find Morris Curtis, and it was not going to be pretty. The Silver Star Saloon was doing brisk business even at mid-morning. Rob pushed through the doors and scanned the room. Morris was there, slouched at a corner table with a bottle in front of him, looking none the worse for wear. Rob's hands clenched into fists. He crossed the room in long strides and slammed his palm down on Morris's table hard enough to make the bottle jump. Morris looked up blearily, his rheumy eyes struggling to focus. "The hell do you want, Yates?" "I want you to know that if you ever, and I mean ever, go near Josephine Curtis again, I will personally make sure you regret it for whatever time you have left on this earth." Rob's voice was low and deadly calm. "Do you understand me?" Morris's face went through several emotions, settling on defensive anger. "That is my niece. I can do what I want." Rob grabbed him by the shirt front and hauled him half out of his chair. "She is not your property. She is a human being, and you left her to die in a snowstorm. That makes you lower than the dirt on my boots. If I had my way, you would be hanging from a tree right now. But Miss Curtis has asked me not to cause trouble, so I am going to give you one chance. Stay away from her. Do not talk to her. Do not even look in her direction. She is under my protection now. If you break that rule, there will not be a conversation. There will just be consequences. Am I being clear enough for your whiskey-soaked brain?" Morris tried to bluster, but something in Rob's eyes must have convinced him this was not an idle threat. He nodded jerkily. Rob released him and stepped back, his lip curling in disgust. "One more thing," Rob said. "You are going to tell everyone in this saloon right now that Josephine did nothing wrong and you were the one at fault. You are going to clear her name." "I am not." Rob leaned in close. "Yes, you are. Or I will tell everyone here exactly what you did. How you tried to kill your own niece because she would not let your business partner paw at her. How much of a man will you seem then, Morris?" Morris's face flushed red, but he was cornered and he knew it. In a voice barely above a mumble, he said, "The girl did nothing wrong. It was my fault." Louder. "The girl did nothing wrong," Morris shouted, anger and humiliation making his voice crack. "I was drunk and stupid and I was wrong." "Is that what you want to hear? It is a start." Rob straightened, looking around the saloon at the men who were all watching now. "Spread that around, and if I hear anyone speaking ill of Miss Curtis, they answer to me. We clear." There were nods and murmurs of assent. Rob gave Morris one last contemptuous look and walked out, his heart still pounding with anger. He wanted to do more, to make Morris truly pay for what he had done, but Josephine's gentle request for him not to get in trouble held him back. For her, he would swallow his rage and settle for protecting her future rather than avenging her past. He walked to the general store and used some of his savings to buy fabric, thread, needles, a warm cloak, and a pair of good boots in what he hoped was Josephine's size. Then he headed back to the boarding house. Alina answered his knock and raised an eyebrow at his parcels. "What is all this? Things Miss Curtis needs. Can you make sure she gets them?" "You do not need to. I know. I want to." He handed over the packages. "Is she all right, sleeping?" Poor thing was exhausted. Alina studied him with those sharp eyes of hers. "You have it bad for her already, do not you?" Rob felt heat creep up his neck. "I just want to make sure she is safe. Hum. Alina did not sound convinced, but she smiled slightly. "You are a good man, Robert Yates. Your mother raised you right." "Thank you, madam. Will you tell Josephine I will check on her tomorrow?" "I will. Now go get some rest yourself. You look dead on your feet." Rob touched his hat brim and headed back to where he had left his horse tied outside. The ride back to the Double R Ranch took another 2 hours, and by the time he got there, He was swaying in the saddle with exhaustion. The ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Tom, took one look at him and sent him straight to the bunkhouse. Rob collapsed on his cot and was asleep before he finished pulling off his boots. He woke the next morning feeling like he had been trampled by cattle, but his first thought was of Josephine. He did his chores in record time, earned some ribbing from the other ranch hands about being eager to get to town, and rode into Williams before noon. At the boarding house, Alina told him Josephine was in the kitchen helping with lunch preparations. Rob found her there, wearing a simple dress that must have belonged to Meg and an apron, her dark hair tied back as she peeled potatoes. She looked up when he entered, and her whole face lit up in a smile that hit him like a punch to the chest. "Rob, you came back. Told you I would." He removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. My feet are still sore, but Mrs. Grant has been putting salve on them, and she gave me this job, and look." She held up a foot to show him the new boots he had bought. "Someone left these for me along with a cloak and sewing supplies. Mrs. Grant said it was an anonymous gift, but I think I know who it was." Rob cleared his throat. "Well, whoever it was probably just wanted to make sure you had what you needed." "Well, whoever it was is very kind and I am grateful." Her eyes danced with amusement and something warmer. "Would you like to stay for lunch? It is the least I can do." "I would like that." So he sat at the big kitchen table while Josephine and Meg and Alina worked around him, preparing food for the boarding house residents. They talked about small things, easy things. Josephine told him about the sewing commissions Alina had already arranged for her, mending and alterations that would bring in extra money. Rob told her about the ranch, about the horses he worked with, about the beauty of the high country in summer. It became a pattern. Every few days, Rob would ride into town on some errand or another and stop by the boarding house. Sometimes he would share a meal, sometimes just coffee. He and Josephine would talk, slowly learning each other. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her parents, about her dreams of opening a dress shop someday. He told her about growing up on his family's small ranch in Texas, about coming to Arizona after his parents died, about the sister he still missed. The attraction between them grew like a steady flame, fed by proximity and genuine affection. Rob found himself thinking about her during his work, remembering the way she laughed or the concentration on her face when she sewed. Josephine caught herself looking for him out the window, her heart lifting when she saw him riding down the street. 6 weeks after the storm, on a mild April afternoon, Rob asked her to walk with him. They strolled through Williams together, Josephine in her new cloak and Rob at her side. People greeted them, the story of what had happened having spread through the small town. Public opinion had firmly turned against Morris Curtis, who had become something of a pariah. Josephine felt safer than she had since arriving in Arizona. They walked to the edge of town where the forest began, the ponderosa pines towering overhead and the air fresh with the scent of sap and wildflowers. Rob seemed nervous, his hands fidgeting with his hat. "Josephine, I need to tell you something," he said finally, her heart sped up. "What is it?" "I cannot stop thinking about you, have not been able to since the night I found you." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I know it has not been long, and I know you have been through hell and maybe are not ready for this, but I have to say it. I am falling in love with you. Maybe have already fallen, and I would be honored if you would let me court you properly." Joy flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. "Rob, I have been waiting for you to say something like that for weeks. I feel the same way. You saved my life, but more than that, you have been kind and patient and good. Yes, yes, I would like that very much." His smile was like the sun coming out. He took her hands carefully as if she was something precious. I want to do this right. I am not a rich man, Josephine. I am just a ranch hand who is good with horses. But I work hard and I am honest, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy. You already make me happy. She squeezed his hands. I do not need wealth, Rob. I need someone I can trust, someone who sees me as more than a burden or an object. You have already given me more than my own family ever did. He lifted one of her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture was sweet and old-fashioned and made her heart flutter. This man, this good, solid, wonderful man wanted her, wanted to build something with her. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Please." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and perfect. Josephine leaned into it, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. The kiss deepened slightly, still respectful but full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "That was my first kiss," Josephine admitted. "Then I am honored to be your first," Rob said, "and if I have my way, your only. I would like that." They walked back to town hand in hand, and if people noticed and whispered, neither of them cared. For the first time since her parents died, Josephine felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The courtship progressed through spring and into summer. Rob was a perfect gentleman, visiting regularly, taking her on chaperoned walks and picnics. He brought her wildflowers and made her laugh with stories about the ranch. Josephine flourished under his attention, the shadows that had haunted her eyes gradually fading. Her sewing business grew, and she was saving money toward her dream of a shop. Elena and Meg watched the romance with approval. "That man is besotted," Elena remarked one evening as Rob said his goodbyes at the door. "And you are just as bad. It is sweet." "He is wonderful," Josephine said dreamily. "Then do not let him slip away. Good men are rare as hen's teeth in this world." In August, Rob invited Josephine to visit the Double R Ranch. She rode out with him on a borrowed horse, nervous about meeting his employer and co-workers, but excited to see where he spent his days. The ranch was sprawling and beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising on all sides. Rob showed her everything with obvious pride, introducing her to the other hands, showing her the horses he trained, pointing out landmarks. They had lunch under a big cottonwood tree, just the two of them, and talked about the future in a way they had been dancing around for weeks. "I have been thinking," Rob said carefully. "The foreman, Tom, is retiring next year. The ranch owner, Mr. Reynolds, has suggested I might take over the position. It would mean better pay, more security." "That is wonderful, Rob. You deserve it. The thing is, the foreman gets a house. A real house, not a bunk in the common room." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm. "I have been saving money, and with the promotion I could afford to support a wife." Josephine's breath caught. "Rob, I know it has not been that long, not even 6 months. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring with a small blue stone. "This was my mother's. It is not fancy, but it is all I have to offer. Josephine Curtis, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, deeply, pouring all his love and hope into it. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her arms around his neck, thinking that 6 months ago she had been freezing to death in a storm, and now she was engaged to the best man she had ever met. They were married in September in the little church in Williams, with Elena and Meg and the ranch hands as witnesses. Josephine wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Rob wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back and his face shaved clean. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was short and sweet. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Rob kissed her with joy and reverence, and everyone cheered. There was a small reception at the boarding house with cake and dancing, and Josephine laughed more than she had in years, spun around the floor in her husband's arms. That night, they went to a room Rob had rented at the hotel, their own private space for the first time. He was gentle and patient with her inexperience, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Making love to him was nothing like the frightening stories other women had told her. It was beautiful and intimate and a little awkward and perfect. Afterward, wrapped in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Josephine felt completely and utterly content. "I love you, Mrs. Yates," Rob murmured into her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Yates." They moved into the foreman's house in January when Tom officially retired. It was small but well built, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft upstairs, a good stove and glass windows. Josephine made curtains and painted the walls and planted an herb garden. Rob built her a proper sewing table and shelves for her fabrics and threads. Together, they made it a home. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rob worked the ranch, managing the hands and the stock with skill and fairness. Josephine continued her sewing work, taking commissions from women in Williams and even some from as far as Flagstaff. They had dinner together every night, talking about their days. They made love regularly with increasing confidence and passion. They laughed together, planned together, built a life together. In March, Josephine realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She told Rob over breakfast one morning, nervous about how he would react. His face went through shock, then wonder, then pure joy. "A baby," he said. "We are having a baby, it seems so." She bit her lip. "Are you happy?" He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "Happy? Josephine, I am over the moon. You are going to be a mother. We are going to be parents." They held each other tightly, both thinking about the fact that a year ago they had not even known each other existed, and now they were married and expecting a child. Life had a strange way of working out. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Josephine had bouts of sickness in the early months. Rob was attentive to the point of being overprotective, much to her amusement. He fretted over her, made sure she rested, brought her crackers and ginger tea for the nausea. As her belly grew, he would place his hands on it and feel the baby kick, his face alight with wonder. "That is our child in there," he would say, awed. "A person we made together." "You are going to be such a good father," Josephine would tell him, and mean it with all her heart. In October, on a cool night with stars bright overhead, Josephine went into labor. Rob fetched the midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Kimball, and then paced the floor anxiously while Josephine labored upstairs. Eleanor and Meg came to help, and Rob was grateful for their presence even as he worried himself sick. It took most of the night, but as dawn broke pink and gold over the mountains, a baby's cry split the air. Rob froze, his heart in his throat. Meg came down the stairs, beaming. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy, and Josephine is fine, tired but fine. You can go up." Rob took the stairs 2 at a time. Josephine was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. Rob approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son for the first time. "He is perfect," he breathed. "You are perfect. God, Josephine, you are amazing." She laughed tiredly. "Do you want to hold him?" Rob did, cradling the baby carefully against his chest. His son stopped crying and blinked up at him with dark, unfocused eyes. Rob felt something in his chest crack open, a love so fierce and immediate that it staggered him. "Hello, little man," he said softly. "I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to spend my life making sure you feel safe and loved and wanted. You are never going to doubt for 1 second that you matter." Josephine watched them with tears streaming down her face. What should we name him? They had discussed names for weeks but never settled on one. Rob looked at his son, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. "James," he said finally. "James Thomas Yates, after both our fathers, James." Josephine tried it out. "I like that, Jamie for short, Jamie." Rob smiled down at the baby. "Welcome to the world, Jamie." The first year of parenthood was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Jamie was a fussy baby at first, colicky and prone to crying at all hours. Rob and Josephine took turns walking him, soothing him, surviving on little sleep and patience. But as he grew, his personality emerged. He was curious and determined, quick to smile, with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-green eyes. Rob was a devoted father, doting on his son in his spare time. He made Jamie toys from wood, told him stories, carried him around the ranch on his shoulders. Josephine watched them together and fell even more in love with her husband, seeing the tenderness with which he treated their child. The seasons turned. Jamie learned to crawl, then walk, his chubby legs unsteady but determined. He babbled and then spoke his first words. "Mama first, then Papa," and Rob felt like his heart might burst. They celebrated his first birthday with cake that Jamie mostly smashed into his face, laughing at his sticky joy. One evening when Jamie was 2, after they had put him to bed, Rob and Josephine sat on their porch watching the stars. Rob had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned against him, content. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "In the storm, all the time." He kissed the top of her head. "I think about how close I came to not finding you. How different everything would be if I had taken a different path. I think about how lucky I am, that you were the kind of man who gave a stranger his coat, that you cared enough to risk yourself for someone you did not know." She tilted her face up to look at him. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Rob. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to live. I love you more than I have words for. I love you too. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. Give you my coat, my warmth, my whole life if you needed it." He kissed her softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Yates." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, thinking about how far they had come. Inside, their son slept peacefully. Around them, the house they had built together stood solid and warm. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. 2 years later, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Emily Rose. She had Rob's smile and Josephine's stubborn streak, and Jamie was instantly protective of his baby sister. The house felt full and loud and perfect, filled with the chaos of young children and the deep satisfaction of a family well loved. Rob earned a partnership in the Double R Ranch after Mr. Reynolds decided to semi-retire. It meant more responsibility but also more security, and a larger house that they moved into when Emily was 6 months old. Josephine finally opened her dress shop in Williams, a small storefront where she created beautiful clothes and employed 2 other seamstresses. Her business thrived, fed by her skill and reputation. Morris Curtis died when Jamie was 4, his liver finally giving out from years of drinking. Josephine felt nothing when she heard, no grief and no satisfaction, just a distant sort of closure. Rob stood beside her at the small funeral, a silent support, and afterward she told him she was ready to let that part of her past go completely. "He does not get to take up any more space in my head," she said. I have too much good in my life to waste time on him." "That is my girl," Rob said proudly. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays, school programs and ranch work, quiet evenings and busy mornings. Jamie grew into a serious boy who loved horses like his father, while Emily was all fire and spirit, always getting into scrapes and making them laugh. They had arguments and tough times, because no life is without them, but they faced everything together with love and commitment and the unshakable foundation they had built. When Jamie was 10 and Emily 8, they took a family trip to St. Louis so Josephine could visit her parents' graves. It was emotional and cathartic, standing at those twin headstones with her husband and children around her. She told her parents about her life, about the family she had built, about the love she had found in the most unlikely way. Rob held her when she cried, and the kids picked wildflowers to leave on the graves. "Thank you for bringing me here," Josephine told Rob that night in their hotel room. "You needed closure." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And I wanted our kids to know where you came from, even if they will never meet your parents. They know the important things, that they come from love on both sides." She kissed him. "You are such a good man, Robert Yates. I hope our children grow up to be half as good as you." "They already are better," he said with confidence, "because they have you as a mother." They returned to Arizona renewed, ready to face whatever came next together. The years continued to roll by with the steady progression of seasons. Jamie turned 15, then 16, growing tall and strong and kind like his father. Emily at 14 was already breaking hearts in Williams with her pretty face and sharp wit. Rob's hair started showing gray at the temples, and Josephine found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror, but neither minded. They had earned every year, every line, every gray hair. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Rob took Josephine back to the line shack where he had sheltered her during that long-ago storm. It was still maintained as an emergency shelter, but it looked smaller than she remembered. They stood inside looking around, and Josephine felt a wave of emotion. 20 years, she said wonderingly. "I was so young, so scared." "I was terrified I would not get you warm in time," Rob admitted. "When I found you in that storm, you were so cold and so brave, and I just knew I could not let you die. Felt it in my bones that you were important even then." "You gave me your coat," she smiled at him, eyes shining. "Such a simple thing, but it meant everything. It meant someone cared if I lived or died. That someone saw me as worth saving. You were worth saving, worth everything." He pulled her close. "I would do it all again, every moment, just to end up here with you." They made love there in the shack, on the same bunk where they had once huddled for warmth, and it felt like closing a circle. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, Josephine thought about the strange and winding path that had led them to this moment. How the worst night of her life had become the beginning of the best parts of her life. How love could come from the most unexpected places in the middle of a storm from a stranger who became her everything. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what? For finding me. For not riding past. For giving me your coat and your warmth and your heart." She looked up at him. "For loving me. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done," Rob said simply, "and I will keep doing it until I draw my last breath." They rode back home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch house came into view, windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, their children were waiting, probably arguing about something trivial, filling the house with noise and life. It was everything Josephine had never dared dream of when she was that scared girl freezing in the snow. The years ahead would bring their own joys and sorrows. They would see Jamie marry a sweet girl from Flagstaff and give them grandchildren. They would watch Emily become a teacher, fierce and dedicated to her students. They would weather droughts and harsh winters and the inevitable losses that come with time. But through it all, Rob and Josephine would face life together, hand in hand, rooted in the love that had sparked to life on the worst and best night of their lives. On quiet evenings, sitting on their porch with the mountains purple in the distance, they would sometimes talk about that night, about the storm and the cold and the moment everything changed, and they would hold hands and be grateful, so grateful, for the twist of fate that brought them together. Because sometimes love arrives not with fanfare and poetry, but with a simple act of kindness. A coat given freely, warmth shared in the darkness, a hand reaching out when someone needed it most, and sometimes that is enough to build a lifetime of happiness on. Jamie and his wife Sarah had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, who would visit the ranch and trail after their grandfather, learning about horses and cattle and the land. Emily married later, to a lawyer from Prescott, and they settled there but visited often. The house that had once seemed so large for just Rob and Josephine now felt too small when the whole family gathered, bursting with noise and laughter and love. Rob retired from active ranch management when he was 55, handing the reins to Jamie, who had grown into a capable rancher in his own right. He and Josephine spent their time between the ranch and her dress shop, which Emily had taken over running but still bore Josephine's name. They traveled some, visiting California and New Mexico, seeing the country they had spent their lives in from new angles. But they always came back to Arizona, to Williams and the ranch and the mountains that felt like home. They walked the same paths they had walked for decades, older and slower now but still together, still in love. Rob still reached for her hand automatically when they walked. Josephine still smiled at him in a way that made his heart skip. Their grandchildren would sometimes ask about how they met, and Josephine would tell the story. About the cruel uncle and the storm, about the cowboy who gave her his coat, about sheltering in the lined shack and falling in love slowly and surely. The children would listen with wide eyes, as if it was a fairy tale, and in a way it was. A fairy tale that happened to be true on their 40th anniversary. Surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, Rob stood and raised his glass. His hair was white now, his face lined, but his eyes were the same gray-green that had looked at Josephine with such intensity in that storm-bound shack 4 decades earlier. "To my wife," he said, his voice still strong, "who I found in a snowstorm and who has been warming my life ever since. You are my greatest adventure, my best decision, my whole heart. Here is to 40 years and to however many more we are blessed with." Josephine stood and kissed him to the cheers of their family, tears streaming down her face, thinking that she was the luckiest woman alive. That scared girl freezing in the snow would never have believed this was possible. But that girl had learned that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. That one act of kindness can change everything. That love, when it comes, is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth treasuring every single day. They sat back down together, Rob's arm around her shoulders, and watched their family celebrate around them. The children played and the adults talked and laughed, and the house was full of the sound of a life well lived. Outside, the Arizona sky stretched wide and clear, stars just beginning to appear as the sun set. And in that moment, surrounded by love, Josephine thought about that coat. The heavy sheepskin coat that a stranger had given her without hesitation, wrapping her in warmth when she had none. It was long gone now, worn out years ago, but what it represented remained. The willingness to give what you have to someone who needs it. The choice to stop and help rather than ride past. The understanding that sometimes saving someone else saves you too. Rob had saved her life that night in the most literal sense. But he had also saved her heart, her future, her ability to trust and hope and love. And she had saved him too, though he might not have known he needed saving. Had given him someone to protect and cherish, had filled his life with purpose and joy and meaning. They had saved each other, really, and built something beautiful from that salvation. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were bundled off to bed, and the house grew quiet, Rob and Josephine stood together on their porch one more time, looking at the stars. It was cold, a bite in the air that reminded them both of that long-ago February night, and Rob automatically drew her closer. "Cold?" he asked. "Not with you here," she said, which had been her answer for 40 years and would remain her answer for whatever time they had left. He smiled and kissed her temple, and they stood there together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and held on tight through everything life had thrown at them. The wind picked up, rustling through the pines, and for just a moment Josephine was transported back to that night, to the howling storm and the desperate cold and the certain knowledge that she was going to die. To the moment, a horse and rider appeared through the snow like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. To the feeling of a warm coat settling around her shoulders and a strong arm supporting her weight, and a voice promising that everything would be all right. He had kept that promise. More than kept it. Had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, had loved her faithfully and well, had built a family and a home and a future with her. And she had done the same for him, pouring all her love and energy and hope into their life together. "What are you thinking about?" Rob asked, sensing her mood. "About how much I love you," Josephine said simply. "About how grateful I am for every day we have had together. About how the worst thing that ever happened to me led directly to the best things in my life. Funny how that works sometimes." Rob turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I love you, Josephine Yates. Have loved you since the moment I saw you stumbling through that storm, so brave and stubborn and refusing to give up. Will love you until my last breath and beyond if such things are possible." "They are possible," Josephine said with certainty. "Because some loves are too big to be contained by one lifetime. They spill over into eternity." He kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of 40 years of devotion, and she kissed him back with all her heart. Around them the ranch settled into night, the horses quiet in their stalls, the cattle bedded down in the pastures, the mountains standing eternal watch. Inside the house their children and grandchildren slept, safe and loved and part of the legacy they had built. It was not a perfect life. Nothing ever is. There had been hardships and losses, arguments and tears, moments of doubt and fear. But it had been a good life, built on a foundation of love and respect and the simple choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, and it had all started with a coat. A cowboy's coat, given freely in the middle of a killing storm. Given to a stranger who became his wife, his partner, his everything. Sometimes, Josephine thought as they finally went inside to their warm bed, the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest consequences. Sometimes one person's choice to help can change the entire trajectory of a life. 2 lives. An entire family's worth of lives, echoing down through generations. She fell asleep in Rob's arms that night, as she had for 40 years, feeling safe and cherished and profoundly grateful. And if her dreams were full of snowstorms and warm coats and cowboys with kind eyes, well, those were good dreams. The best dreams. The dreams that had somehow, miraculously, come true. The years that followed were gentler than those that had come before. Rob and Josephine settled into the comfortable rhythms of their later years, content with simple pleasures. Morning coffee on the porch, visits from grandchildren, Sunday dinners with the whole family gathered around the table they had bought 40 years ago. Quiet evenings with books and conversation, and the easy silence of two people who knew each other so completely that words were often unnecessary. Rob's joints ached more in the mornings, and Josephine's eyesight was not what it used to be, requiring spectacles for her sewing work. But they were healthy and happy, grateful for each day, knowing that their time together was precious and finite and not to be wasted on trivial concerns. They watched their grandchildren grow, attending school programs and birthday parties, offering advice when asked and staying silent when not. They saw Jamie expand the ranch, buying neighboring property and building it into something even more successful than it had been. They saw Emily's students flourish under her passionate teaching, many of them going on to college because she had encouraged them to dream bigger. They were proud of the family they had raised, the legacy they were leaving. But more than that, they were proud of each other, of the partnership they had forged in the aftermath of trauma and crisis, of the life they had built with love and determination and unwavering commitment. On a bright morning in June, when Josephine was 68 and Rob 73, they took a walk through the meadow near their house. The wildflowers were blooming in profusion, painting the landscape in purples and yellows and reds. They walked slowly, hand in hand, breathing in the sweet air and enjoying the warmth of the sun. "Beautiful day," Rob commented. "Every day with you is beautiful," Josephine replied, and she meant it. He stopped walking and turned to her, his weathered face serious. "I want you to know something. In case I do not get another chance to say it. Rob, you are not dying. We are all dying slowly. That is just life, but I want you to hear this." He took both her hands in his. "You are the reason I have been happy, the reason I got up every morning and worked hard and tried to be a good man. Everything good in my life traces back to you. Finding you in that storm was not luck. It was fate. We were meant to find each other, meant to love each other, meant to build this life together. And I would not change a single moment of it. Not the hard times, not the sad times, not anything. Because it all led here to this moment with you, and that makes everything worth it." Josephine was crying now, but they were happy tears. "You stubborn man, you are going to make me ruin my makeup." He laughed and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you more than life itself, Josephine Yates. Never forget that." "I could never forget. And I love you just as much. More, probably, but I know you will argue if I say so." They stood there in the meadow for a long time, holding each other, surrounded by the beauty of the land they loved. And when they finally walked back to the house, they did so still hand in hand, still together, still as in love as they had been 48 years ago when a storm and a coat and a cowboy's kindness had changed everything. The years continued their inevitable march. Rob turned 75, then 78. Josephine celebrated her 70th birthday surrounded by 3 generations of family. They moved a little slower, tired a little easier, but their love remained constant and strong. They still reached for each other in the night. Still said, "I love you," every morning and every evening. Still looked at each other sometimes and marveled that they had gotten so lucky. Rob passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80, with Josephine beside him as she had been for 52 years. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was enormous and consuming, but underneath it was gratitude. Gratitude that they had had so much time together, that he had not suffered, that she had been there at the end as he had been there for her in the beginning. The funeral was large, attended by what seemed like half of Williams and everyone from the ranch. Jamie spoke about his father with tears streaming down his face, talking about Rob's kindness and integrity and the example he had set. Emily read a poem. The grandchildren, some of them with children of their own now, shared memories. And Josephine sat in the front pew, accepting condolences, feeling both empty and full at the same time. That night, alone in the house they had shared for so long, she sat on the porch and looked at the stars. She talked to Rob as if he could hear her, telling him about the service, about how much everyone had loved him, about how much she missed him already. And she thought about their story, about the cold and the coat and the love that had sustained them through 5 decades of life. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, "for stopping, for giving me your coat, for loving me so well. I will see you again, my darling, but not yet. I still have work to do here." Josephine lived another 12 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community. She still ran her dress shop until she was 80, then handed it over to her granddaughter who had inherited her talent for sewing. She spent time with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their great-grandfather, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. She tended her garden and took walks and lived each day as fully as she could, honoring Rob's memory by continuing to embrace life. But she missed him with an ache that never fully went away. She would see something beautiful and want to share it with him. Would have a thought and turn to speak before remembering he was not there. Would wake in the night reaching for him, only to find empty space. On a cold February morning, exactly 63 years after the day he had found her in that storm, Josephine passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 82 years old, surrounded by photos of her family, in the house she and Rob had made a home. The family liked to think that Rob had come for her, that they were together again in whatever came next. At her funeral, Jamie stood to speak one more time, his own hair white now, his face lined with years. He told the story of how his parents had met, the tale he had heard countless times growing up, about the storm and the coat and the love that had grown from crisis. About 2 people who had saved each other and built a life and a family that extended to 4 generations now. About a legacy of love that would continue long after they were both gone. "My father gave my mother his coat," Jamie said, his voice breaking slightly, "and she gave him her heart." And from that simple exchange came all of this. All of us. Every person in this room exists because a cowboy stopped to help a stranger in a snowstorm 63 years ago, because he was the kind of man who could not ride past someone in need. Because he gave what he had without thought for himself. That is the legacy they left us, not just their love for each other, but their example of how to love, generously, selflessly, completely. They taught us that family is everything, that love is work worth doing, that kindness matters. And those lessons will live on in all of us, and in our children, and in our children's children. My parents are gone now, but what they built remains. What they taught us endures. They will never truly be gone as long as we remember them and live by the values they embodied. They buried Josephine next to Rob in the Williams Cemetery, under a tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstones were simple, giving their names and dates, and under both were carved the same words, "Together always." In the years that followed, the family would visit often, bringing flowers, telling the children about their ancestors. The story of Rob and Josephine became part of the family mythology, told and retold, a reminder of where they came from and the love that had started it all. The ranch continued under Jamie's children, then his grandchildren, prospering through good times and bad. The dress shop remained in Williams, bearing Josephine's name, run by her descendants who had inherited her skill. And sometimes, on cold February nights when the wind howled and snow fell, people in Williams would tell the story of the cowboy and the girl in the storm, of the coat that saved a life, of the love that grew from kindness. It became a local legend, embellished and romanticized over time, but rooted in truth, because it had happened. A cruel uncle had left a girl to die in a snowstorm. A cowboy had found her and given her his coat. They had sheltered together, fallen in love, and built a life that echoed through generations. It was a simple story and a profound one, a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, that one act of compassion can change everything. That love, when it comes, can heal the deepest wounds and build something beautiful from the wreckage of pain. The line shack where they had sheltered was eventually replaced with a newer structure, but the family made sure there was a plaque there telling the story. On this site in February 1878, Robert Yates gave Josephine Curtis his coat and changed both their lives forever. Love begins with kindness, and that, in the end, was the truth of it. Love did begin with kindness, with the choice to see another person's suffering and respond with compassion, with the willingness to give what you have, even if it costs you, with the understanding that we are all connected, that helping another person helps ourselves. Rob and Josephine had understood that instinctively, had lived it every day of their lives together. And the family they created, the love they shared, the legacy they left behind was a testament to the power of that simple truth. Sometimes all it takes is a coat, given freely in the storm, and sometimes that is enough to build forever on.